Hey guys, what's up and welcome to another episode of the GoodCast Show. So my guest today is a professor of Asian Studies. He deals with governance issues in Southeast Asia, especially Malaysia, Brunei and Singapore. He also does research on island nations in the South Pacific. His views are regularly sought after by major news outlets around the world, including Straits Times, the South China Morning Post, the New York Times, the Financial Times, BBC World TV, CNBC and Bloomberg. And now he's on the GoodCast Show. He also writes political commentary for leading publications around the world. Please welcome the amazing Professor James Chin. Hi, Professor. How are you?
Good morning. How are you, my friend?
Good. I am good. Firstly, it's an honor to have you on. I've been watching your commentary for a long time, whether it's the news outlets or Astro recently. You had a very good, nice, interesting session. So today's discussion will revolve around, of course, the recent PKR party elections, and we'll go into Sabah state elections and then touching a bit on MA63 as well. But we'll start off with this. Because our Prime Minister PMX has come under scrutiny by the Centre of Combat Corruption and Cronyism, the C4 Centre, who have accused him of betraying reformist ideals by openly endorsing political loyalty over integrity. So in your opinion, Professor, why has Dato Sri Anwar continued the practice of appointing political figures to government roles?
Okay, so I think to start off with, we need a bit of context. So the context is that corruption and nepotism and cronyism has always been key features of Malaysian politics. Started off basically from the late 70s and it sort of took off during the Mahathir administration for 81 onwards. So it is now sort of a permanent fixture of Malaysian politics. So when you accuse Anwar Ibrahim of practicing all these things, he is actually not the one who started it. But in some ways, the reason why the accusation against Anwar is taken more seriously than, say, accusations against people like Najib is because PKR was formed as a reform party, as you know, right, in 1998. And basically, the whole branding of PKR is that it is a reformist party going to fundamentally change Malaysia. So for the past year and a half, I think among the chartering classes, there's a clear consensus that even though he's finally the prime minister after more than 20 years in the wilderness, he has not actually done any fundamental reforms. People thought that, after the fall of the first Pakatan government in 2020, now that he's given a chance to come back, they will start rolling out the reforms. People kind of forgave the first PH government in 2018 to 2020 for not undertaking any real reforms because that was the first regime change. And secondly, the more important factor was that Mahathir came back as a prime minister, right? So Mahathir is not exactly a person known as a reformer. So people kind of forgave PKR and the PH. But now they thought that now you're back in government for the second time, surely you're going to roll out some fundamental reforms, right? And when Malaysians talk about fundamental reforms, they talk about fundamental reforms to the political system and the political structure. Because I think everybody realized that this country really cannot sort of progress over the long run if key issues like race and ethnic tensions and corruption, misgovernance, abuse of power, all these core issues are not being addressed. So if you speak to the chartering class in Kuala Lumpur for the last, say, 12 months, I think increasingly people say that you have reformasi turning into reformati. So this is becoming a major tagline in social media. Part of the reason he's not bringing any reforms is people keep forgetting, right? He actually wasn't elected. His party did not win the majority, right? His coalition was global together because he was asked by the king to put together a government. And you have to remember, right? His most important partner is actually UMNO. And I'm not sure UMNO is known for reformasi, right?
Really?
So it's very difficult if your most senior partner in your coalition is somebody who's not known for reforms. Plus, the leader of UMNO, how should I put this in a polite way? He's got his own set of issues with DNA and all the other scandals involving. And also, I think the most important reason that people need to understand is that Anwar is not in a position to undertake real reforms because he's preparing the government to win the next general election. So that is the biggest thing hanging over his shoulder. Now, you said, oh, that's normal. Every government have to prepare for re-election. But in Anwar's case, he has an added problem in that his government, even if you combine with UMNO, right, they won only 30% of the Malay vote. And it is generally understood that in Malaysia, right, at least at the federal government level, you cannot have political stability over the long run if you don't have core Malay support, right? So the core Malay support now, whether you like it or not, it is quite clear the core Malay support now is with PAS and Perikatan. So for all these major reasons I've mentioned, he did not get a mandate. He's got a difficult partner, shall we say, plus the issue of Malay votes, right? You really can't expect him to do any real reformasi. So while C4 is reminding the Malaysian public about the importance of political reforms, and I'm all for it, I'm just saying that realistically, you really cannot expect him to do any real reforms.
Do you think that we as Malaysians should also accept that, considering the very intricate network of GLCs, GLICs that have been created by the UMNO regime in the past 60 years, together with a very, I would say, solid civil service structure that's already been placed as a very permanent layer in the whole government's structure, right? That we cannot really expect reforms coming from Anwar because he's operating within a system where there are now too many players on the other side who are used to a certain way, and for asking them to change now would be almost impossible.
Yes, there's an element of that. But if Anwar wins a really, really big victory next round, then he has the political capital to undertake real change. So, for example, if you remember in 2018, when the first regime change happened, Mahathir did have the political capital to change many, many things. So, for example, in the Malay community, I remember speaking to some of the members of the Malay establishment. The first thing that absolutely shocked them was actually not regime change. I can tell you that in my interviews with them, right? The first thing that really shocked them was that Mahathir appointed Ling Wang and the finance minister. You have to remember, right? No non-Malay has ever been finance minister from 70s onwards, right? It was, because traditionally speaking, right, we all know finance minister is the unofficial number 2 because that's the one controlling the money. So people were very shocked. And the second shock to the system was that he appointed a Catholic from Sabah to be the to be Chief Justice, which was another unheard of things, right? So it is not true that you can't make fundamental change. You can make fundamental change if you have the political capital. And this comes back to my earlier point a minute ago, saying that if you don't have majority Malay support, right, then you can't do fundamental change. Because it's understood that, the Malaysian political system is dominated by the Malays. And if you don't have Malay support, how can you change, the fundamental structures of the Malaysian system?
But in your opinion, though, you yourself have highlighted the phrase of reformasi sudah mati. There's other ones, reformasi sudah basi, and all these kind of things have been coming out as well. But with all this, with this recent defense of the political appointees, do you think that this is the final nail in the coffin for the reformasi movement?
Just a slight correction. I'm not defending anybody. I think all these things are very, very difficult. I think Anwar has been put in a difficult place. I'm sure a lot of things that he doesn't like it, but he has to go along with it because he wants to win big in the next general election. I'm actually pro-reformasi. I believe that if we don't change the fundamentals of the Malaysian political system, and we can go into details what are the areas, then Malaysia is really heading towards a political crisis, also a country crisis in the not too distant future. But coming back to your point about Anwar appointing people and doing things that he shouldn't be doing, the only thing I can say is that, the Anwar that we see today is not the real Anwar. The only Anwar that we see is the Anwar that was thrust into the office of the Prime Minister because of because nobody won a majority in the last general election. If you want to know the real Anwar, you have to give him a mandate, then the real Anwar will come out. The Anwar that you see today is an Anwar that is forced to compromise left and right because he's in a precarious position of not having a majority. And secondly, he's in an unusual position that he has 2/3 majority. On paper, he's very strong, but in reality, without the Malay mandate, he is strong on paper, but he cannot use that power. So it is
Now,
a very strange system.
So since you brought up the elections as well, that's an interesting point, topic to discuss. And I just want to get your views on a few things that's happened recently in, of course, our lead up to G16. So we have seen that Perikatan Nasional have sort of changed their way of speaking. Tan Sri Muhyiddin, even Dato Sri Hamzah have said that they want to take a Malaysian approach. Tan Sri Muhyiddin saying that while he said he was Malay first before, now he's Malaysian. Why do you think they have changed their rhetoric? Are they seeing a decline in the Malay support? Are they going for a multiracial approach?
No, they're not. So the only reason they're changing their rhetoric is because they look at the statistic. It is quite clear the most important thing that happened in 2022, plus the 6 state elections, is that PAS has broken out of the 4 core Malay states. So if you want to look at Malaya collectively as a whole, right, PAS used to be locked up in the so-called the 4 core Malay states in the northern part of Malaya. Now they've broken down to half of Malaya, basically up to the Selangor line, right? So the second most important thing that happened is that Bersatu was not able to deliver a lot of the Malay votes. So PAS is sort of the hard part of Perikatan, getting a lot of the so-called hard Malay votes. And Bersatu has to move into a more moderate stand in order to capture the urban Malay votes. And part of the strategy for winning the urban areas is that you have to win a segment of the non-Malay community. So that's what Bersatu is basically doing. My argument is that the way to understand Bersatu is actually to see Bersatu as a clone of UMNO. That's basically what Bersatu is. Don't forget, the only reason Bersatu was formed was because all the UMNO people who cannot accept the leadership of Najib, right? They went back to Mahathir, and Muhyiddin, of course, was sacked. And because of that, they formed a party to counter UMNO. The original idea of Bersatu was that if Bersatu won very big the last election, if they had formed the government in 2018, right, they would have killed off UMNO, but they were not able to do it.
Let's go to the PKR elections. What has happened? There's been a lot of questions have been popping up. Now, one of it was, of course, before the elections, there was suggestion by the top leaders to revert back to the delegate system from the one member, one vote system, which they were practicing for a long time, which basically gave the power to vote for the top 6 positions to just 30,000 delegates instead of the 1 million, right, members that they have. Do you think that this is a regressive move?
Let me answer it another way, right? So they try to make the system as democratic as possible, including online voting. As you mentioned, more than 30,000 people were given a chance to vote. But if you look at the turnout, even with online voting, right, only about 50 to 60% turnout. So about 40% of the people, even though they were given the vote, right, they did not bother to vote. So that's the reason why Nurul Izzah won with, I think, just above 9,000 votes, when 32,000 people were given a chance to vote. So you can argue that although people were given a chance to vote, they didn't want to do it. So I don't know what is the reason. It could be, every time you do online thing, you have to remember Malaysians are a suspicious lot. They don't trust the online thing. They think it's prone to manipulation or whatever it is. But my point is that it is always a good idea if you allow everyone to vote. But the reality is that even if you allow everyone to vote, right, if you can get a 50% turnout, that would be considered very good already. So I wouldn't worry so much about the way the vote is done in political parties, because at the end of the day, it's really up to the members of the political party to say whether they're happy or unhappy about the system. But what we can say is that Malaysians, for whatever reason, if you are given a chance to vote, you don't always do the most rational thing. So that's the reason why, right? If you look at the way that the system works in Malaysia, our turnout, has never been very, very high. So even though people are given a chance to vote, some people just can't be bothered. So this is, to me, this is, part and parcel of the Malaysian character. how should I put this in a polite way? If you give them something, right, they won't value it unless you put money to it, then they will do their work. So that's the reason why, right, in political party, right, money plays such an important role. Even though they're members of political party, they're supposed to do all the right things, right? But right, even campaign, nothing will happen unless the money goes down to the ground. And these are members of the political party, right? They're supposed to do the work, right? But even members of the political party, you still have to, give them vitamin M before anything jalan.
But speaking of which, in the coming general elections, we've seen in the past by-elections a lot of examples of low voter turnouts and all these cases. I think across most of them, even we've had specific communities boycotting the by-elections and all that. How big a factor do you think the voter turnout or the lack thereof of voter turnout would be in the coming GE16?
So it's not possible to sort of make a sweeping statement across Malaysia because, how should I put it, the Malaysian electoral system, you can sort of divide it into three broad areas. Sabah and Sarawak, one group. In West Malaysia is urban areas, and then the rural areas, three big groups, right? So in terms of voter turnout, I'm not so worried about low voter turnout in urban areas, but low voter turnout will be a big problem for Pakatan Harapan / UMNO if it happens in the rural areas. Because what we know is that in the rural areas at the present moment, the best election machinery, as in grabbing people to come out and vote, right, has become PAS. In the old days, right, UMNO had a much better machinery, and the secret sauce to UMNO's machinery in the rural areas was their Wanita group. So when the money went down, the Wanita group went out and grabbed all the pakcik, all the makcik out to vote. I saw it with my own eyes when I was following them. They go to every house in the kampong. Even people who were very, very sick, right? They'll arrange for transport, everything, and drag you to the polling booth. That machinery, I would argue, doesn't exist anymore. Now the best machinery in the rural areas is PAS. So if the turnout is low in the rural areas, that will be a big problem for the Madani government. But the urban areas, low turnout doesn't make that much of a difference because most of the urban areas are won by the DAP, and most of them have a substantial majority. Unless there's an all-out boycott by the non-Malay community, then it will be a problem. In terms of low voting turnout in the urban areas, the other side factors are the Indian votes. Indian votes, although they, let me go back a bit. It is not true that the Indians are marginalized in the system. The reason why people say the Indians are marginalized in the system is because they don't control a single seat, right? There's no Indian majority seats in Malaysia. The reason why they said the Indians are marginalized is because the Indians have never been able to exploit their big numbers in certain seats and become the kingmaker. So that's the reason why they're marginalized, because the Indian vote has always been more or less split. So if the Indians don't come out and vote in large numbers, I think that will make majority a big question. But I don't think that thing applies to the urban Chinese community. It doesn't make that much of a difference.
Now, again, just taking this point because it's so interesting, right? We're talking about G16 is always an interesting thing to talk about. But on the Perikatan side, it seems from what you're saying that PAS seems to be the strongest component party in the coalition. Do you think there's any merit in them contesting for who to lead Perikatan in the coming GE? I mean, will that be an issue?
It will be issue, but that will not be issue because as long as Hadi Awan is the leader of PAS, PAS will not push to be the leader, or they will not put up one of their own as the so-called poster boy or prime ministerial candidate. There are many reasons for that, but the key reason is that among the Malay establishment and the Malay political class, there's a general sort of a consensus that Hadi Awan is not prime ministerial material. I don't want to go to details why, but I'm sure you can guess.
Yes.
So there is no way even among the Malay establishment itself will say that we will allow PAS or Hadi Awan to be prime minister. So that will not happen. The best they can hope for is to push for PAS person like Dr. Sam to be DPM number 1. That is the best they can hope for. But so I don't think we have to worry about that. what we have to worry about, speaking as non-Malay, what we have to worry about is that why is past ideology, which on paper is not the sort of ideology that fit a multiracial, multi-religious polity like Malaysia, why is it so attractive? And why is it so attractive to young Malays? Because one of the things that really, really bothers me for the past few years is that I'm sure you will remember there was a big push on this thing called Undi 18.
Yeah.
If you look at all the push by the NGOs, all the groups, right, before the law was passed in Parliament, the big argument was two arguments. The first one was that Undi 18 brings Malaysian up to the standard because the majority of democratic countries around the world, the voting age is 18, so you want to be part of the mainstream. The second argument they put forward is that you want the young people to have a stake in the political system, they're mature enough to vote, and also young people, right, are more knowledgeable, more democratic, blah, blah, blah. But lo and behold, once you give them the vote, all of them voted for PAS, which is a very conservative party. So much for the argument that they will be more liberal, put Malaysia in a more open democratic space. So that's the reason why I always tell my political friends in KL, be careful when you guys got all these big ideas for outside Malaysia about democracy, when you shake the tree, there is this thing called unintended consequences.
Fair enough.
Right? Because you look at the statistic, is people forget, Malaysia have very short memory. You look at the way that these young people have changed the fundamental results. UMNO was totally wiped out in Terengganu. Not a single UMNO person was elected, Why?
Yeah.
You ask us why? Because of the huge number of young voters. Kelantan, I think UMNO ended up 1 or 2 only. And UMNO make major progress even in so-called the island, Penang Island, remember? Nurul Izzah got kicked out.
Yeah.
And on the Seberang Praya, all are won by PAS. Who do you think is voting for these people, right? You can't say that it's the old voters, right? Because they cannot change the voting pattern suddenly. It's the young new voters. So,
I think
people talk about democracy, want to promote this, want to promote that, I'm not saying it's not a good thing. I'm just saying that things, think deeper. It's not black and white. Sometimes you get unintended consequences.
Yeah, fair enough. But another interesting thing is, of course, UMNO. There, of course, a lot of grassroots. There are section of them who don't like the UMNO DAP coalition, and they've been voicing all this. But of course, Dato Sri Nazri, I think is his name. But he said that, look, UMNO had no choice but only PH. They could not do the same with Bersatu and all that. Whatever said and done, UMNO is a legacy party and a big part of Malaysian politics. Do you see a future for them? Do you think that they will come back to the glory days as what was before?
Okay, so if you look at going by statistics alone, right, UMNO has been a dying party since 2008. The number of MPs keep dropping in every election. That's number one point. Secondly, right, people have to be careful about this so-called bad blood between UMNO and DAP. The best example of that is that for the past 24 months or past 2 years, right, you have constant attack by the poster boy Akmal against DAP, then the DAP youth leader will attack back. So people think that these two cannot work together, right? I can tell you, right, that is just complete wayang. It's actually not true. And I'll explain to you the big secret sauce, right? The big secret sauce that people don't understand. What they see on the newspaper, social media attacking each other, right? It has no bearing at all on the real politics. Now, how can I say a thing like that? People say, what sort of nonsense are you talking about? And I'll explain it to you in a very simple way. You look at the way politics is run in terms of elections. Real power comes on the number of YBs you have and how you get elected, right? Where does UMNO fight the seats? UMNO fight the seat in the rural Malay areas or Malay majority areas. Where does DAP fight the seats? Urban Chinese majority area. They don't stand against each other during elections.
So why are they fighting?
That is a fact. So what are you talking about? So when Akmal attacked DAP, right, he is speaking to his own people. You think he's worried about the Chinese not voting for UMNO? What are you talking about? UMNO is not standing in Chinese areas. So when DAP attacked UMNO, right, the Chinese said, yes, you stand up for, non-Malays. But is DAP standing in rural Malay areas against UMNO?
No.
You see my point? It's actually why they are solidifying support among their own community. Because people expect UMNO to stand for Ketuhanan Melayu, so they say all these things. That's why you look at Ahmad, right? He keep talking, this is a Malay system. The Malay must be number one, Islam must be number one. DAP is no. The non-Malays are also Malaysians. They're speaking to their own base because they don't contest against each other. So I don't know why everybody in Malaysia gets sucked into this game, get really excited, get agitated, and I keep telling people, calm down. This is all a wayang because they don't contest against each other. Fundamentally, they're speaking to a different group of voters.
But interesting, you brought up the issue of DAP being very strong in urban Chinese areas, right? Why can't? Because I went to Kuning recently to campaign with PSM, and I noticed that the rural Chinese are they support BN still. Why? Why haven't they moved to DAP?
In the rural areas, like I said, because the DAP candidate is not there. So there's no way you can shift. So you can only support Pakatan Harapan. And in the rural areas, usually the Pakatan Harapan candidate from now on onwards is the Barisan candidate, or basically BN. Basically UMNO. Let's be honest, right? Barisan National exists on paper only. When we talk about Barisan National, we basically talking about UMNO. So basically, DAP and PH will have to push the supporters in the rural area to support UMNO. So that's the reason why after 2018, right, all the analysts in Malaysia, right, they're obsessed with this thing on whether the vote can be transferred. Remember, at one time, everyone was talking about this. Whether, if you are a Chinese person, voting in a Malay village, right, are you willing to transfer your vote from Pakatan to UMNO and vice versa? So that is what the argument is about. Now, this sort of game that I mentioned just now, playing around, right, that sort of game will only happen maybe for the next 20 or 30 years until we change the electoral system. Because one of the problems we have currently is that the electoral system is sort of rigged in a way. So if you look at the 222 seats, right, 90 to 110 is Malay majority areas, in other words, in the rural areas. So the outcome of any government in Malaysia, no matter how you vote, will be a Malay government or Malay plus government. The non-Malays under the present system will not be able to capture enough votes. Even if the DAP capture all the non-Malay majority seats plus the so-called mixed seats, right? The maximum the DAP can go is around 60 only. And in Malaysia, to form a government is 112. To have a stable government is 148. So those are fixed numbers that you cannot run away from.
So let's go back to PKR, because of course they have gone through a lot of change and they are also heading towards the Sabah state elections as well as the GE, upcoming GE. But just to round up on this topic of the elections, do you think that the final election results in the party have sort of presented Dato Sri Anwar finally with a party that's now under his control, where the opposers have been weeded out and more friendlies in crucial positions?
So the party has always been Anwar Ibrahim's party. He has never faced any real opposition in the party.
But there have been groups, right, within it, Rafizi versus Azmin last time, and
all those factions are, how should I put it, at the end of the day, they will support Anwar no matter what. So that's the reason why from day one people call PKR as Anwar Ibrahim fan club. I'm sure you heard of that before. Look, the reality is this, right? My argument is a very simple argument. My argument is that in terms of Malaysian political culture, people here accept if the children sort of take over their parents' seat. The father or mother was the YB who retired, the children go in. I think people accept that. But I think the majority of people cannot accept if the party is a family-run party, as in number one, number two are from the same family. I think people cannot accept it. I could be wrong. I stand to be corrected. But I think so far, I've only seen one party where that has happened. It's a small party, Barisan National Party in Sabah, where the son took over and there was no problem. The son was number two before. But I think generally speaking, even among Malay political culture, I think they are uncomfortable with that. what they want is that if the children want to take over, that is fine, but the principal must step down first before the children take over. So I think that is sort of acceptable, but I think the current one is not acceptable because number one and number two, father and daughter team. Now, if you speak to PKR people, right, they say this is the wishes of the delegate. That's fine. This is your internal party thing. But the reality is that she has to perform. So her first big performance will be in Sabah, whether she can deliver. Sabah is an interesting case study, because Sabah is a place where PH has only won, PKR has only won 2 seats last round. Yeah. But more importantly, right, Sabah is the great experiment whether PKR can sell its brand of multiracialism, right? You know, right? From the time Malaysia was founded, right, people have been searching for a party that can truly promote multiracialism in Malaysian politics. So in history, if you look at Malaysian history, right, the most so-called successful one previously was widely seen to be Gerakan, the so-called voice of conscience. Gerakan died out. Then you got the PPP in Perak. Then you got the so-called DAP. DAP tried to promote very hard, but they've never been able to recruit enough Malay members to make it sort of multiracial. So PKR is interesting that you have a sort of a Malay majority, but you have significant Indian and Chinese support. So to me, right, the PKR is the best example today of a real multiracial party in Malaysia. And if they can sell their product in Sabah, then I would say that is a very good sign for the next GE for Anwar Ibrahim.
So then let's go to the Sabah state elections then, Prof. So, of course, Izzah has announced that her hope that PKR will contest in 13 seats in Sabah state elections. At present, they only have 2 seats. So is Sabah sort of PKR's next frontier? Are they trying to increase their presence there?
It is not the next frontier, but it is the first big test for Nurul Izzah, because it's understood that it's a state election, so the Prime Minister being busy in his job, this thing will basically be run by the Deputy President, which is Nurul Izzah. My take is that in Sabah, it's very difficult to predict who's going to do well, because the Sabah coalition usually comes together just before elections. I would suggest to you that when Nurul Izzah said 13, they want 13 candidates, that is sort of a opening negotiation number. I think she knows deep down that she's not going to get that number. There are just too many players in Sabah and everybody's jockeying. My prediction at the current moment, right, is that what you will have in Sabah is that there will be an agreement among all the major blocks, GRS, Pakatan Harapan, and BN/UMNO. There will be some sort of agreement among them for the majority of seats around Sabah, but there will be a chunk of seats where they cannot agree on, and that will be free for all. Okay? So it is very likely that what we will see in Sabah after the next election is that we will still have some sort of a GRS/PH and maybe /UMNO state government where everyone is represented. But GRS is fighting tooth and nail. They understand which way the wind is blowing. All they're fighting now is to make sure that the chief minister's post goes to GRS. That is really.
But GRS also said, the current chief minister Hajiji also said that he's ready to contest alone with just GRS if the PH and BN thing happens.
No, that is not going to happen. Because everybody understands. You can't go into alone in Sabah. It doesn't work in Sabah because Sabah politics revolves around personality and huge amount of resources. So it is highly unlikely that Hajiji will going alone. In some ways, you can say that there's no way he can going alone because he has to get a consensus among his 7-8 parties. And those parties, a lot of them doesn't believe in going alone because the risks are too high. It is better to have some sort of even if it is a loose agreement. We all know political agreements are not like buying a house, SPA cannot be enforced in the courts. But you must have some sort of understanding that once the election is held, once the results come in, right, who will take the lead in forming the government. So I think the important thing for GRS is that they just want to be in a pole position, whatever the results. We have agreement that GRS will form the lead to create the government, plus a GRS nominee will be the chief minister.
And do you think that the pressure is on PKR this time because as they are part of the government, the unity government, that with the, as you said just now, Sabah elections require a lot of resources and all that, that this would be the ideal time for them, if not the only time for them. Let's assume that they lose the upcoming elections, that this would be the ideal time for them to increase their presence because they're in government, they have resources to play with and all that. Is it, so this is the time?
The problem with PKR in Sabah is that it is wrapped by factionalism. I'll give you a public example. So PKR for years, their state leader was Christina. And, but for years, a big chunk of PKR have never accepted her leadership. So almost every year when she was leader, right, one of the PKR branches will hold a meeting and say that they want to pass a no confidence motion against her. So it's always been very, very strange. But put it this way, PKR, unless they can increase their number of state seats, right, they will not be in a lead position to negotiate with GRS. In terms of the person who will call most of the shots in terms of negotiation will actually be DAP, because DAP is on track to win 5 or 6 seats. So people like Ginger will play a major role in negotiation. Unless PKR suddenly can win 5 or 6 seats, then they will have a major say on the table. The big question mark in Sabah now is not so much the Muslim vote. People understand the way the Muslim votes are carved. What I've been told from my contacts in Sabah is that the big question mark in Sabah is that how will the Kedazan Dusun, the native vote in the interior, will be divided up? Because right now it is not very, very clear, because people are moving around, and what I've noticed in Sabah, especially the last few months, is that there is a certain surge of Sabah nationalism. So there's a very strong move to say that let's discard Malaya-based parties. And among the Kedazan Dusun, they said that there's only vote for Sabah-based party. So when they talk about Sabah-based party, among the Kedazan Dusun is basically between PBS, Star, and maybe one other party, but that's about it. So it'll be interesting to see, because with the Kedazan Dusun, right, they've always been divided thus far. And if they can come together and form a solid bloc in the next election, right, this means they are on track to be a major player in PRS, and they'll be guaranteed the first DCM post. So that will be the main target.
But just to get your sort of prediction on this, if you could look into your crystal ball, Prof, do you think that PKR will increase their seats to maybe 13 or no?
No, definitely not 13. If they can get 5 or 6, I'll be very, very surprised. Look, as I said earlier, it's too early to make any predictions. Everything will be clear on nomination day. From the candidates, nominated, you have a rough idea where all the coalition and who is in whose camp and who has the best chance of winning. As I said earlier, I stand by my prediction that there will be some sort of a agreement, even a loose agreement, where certain seats are already negotiated pre-election. Others will be free for all. But you will not see a totally free for all elections. That will not happen.
So before we touch the whole Sabah for Sabahans movement, which I would like to get your thoughts on, I also want to go a bit on MA63, because recently Party Solidarity Tanah Airku Star Information Chief Anwar Ghani, he criticized Nurul Izzah. He said that her hope for PKR contest in 30 seats was baseless and solely aimed at undermining the spirit of MA63. Is he right in saying so?
Yes, because like I said, in the last few months, you can see a very clear rise in Sabah nationalism, the Sabah for Sabahans sentiment. But the MA63 thing has been hanging over Sabah and Sarawak for the last 10, 15 years. It's now a permanent feature of politics in Sabah and Sarawak. The problem for parties like PKR, DAP, and UMNO is that people are saying that, if you are a really strong Sabah nationalist, why don't you ditch these Malayan parties and just set up your own party? So, for example, people have been saying to DAP Sabah for a long time, you actually don't need the national DAP branding. You can set up a Sabah version of DAP and we will support you. But the way Sabah works is that, unlike Sarawak, it is not possible for the Sabah parties to break away from their national counterparts. So, for example, UMNO Sabah, right? it is not possible for any of the three factions to break away from the federal side because they can't survive outside the ecosystem, not at the present moment. The West Malaysian party in Sabah are too entrenched in Sabah politics now. What they should have done is that they should have stopped them from coming in early on in the first election when they appear. They should have wiped all of them out. Then we will have a different scenario. So you see, right, the big difference between Sabah and Sarawak is that Barisan Nasional was never able to export their version of MCA, MIC, and Gerakan /UMNO in Sarawak. None of those people have a branches in Sarawak. So that's why in Sarawak, they were able to shut out the Malayan parties quite successfully. But in Sabah, after 1990, after PBS swung to the opposition, Barisan Nasional, UMNO, MCA, they all came in very strongly. And now they've been there for so many years already. It's very, very difficult to disengage. The only way that can happen if in the next election, right, all the West Malaysian party lose out. And I don't expect that to happen for a simple reason that Sabah politics still revolves around personalities. As long as key personalities are willing to work with UMNO, willing to work with PKR, willing to work with DAP, West Malaysian Party will have a presence in Sabah.
Now, let's just go to the Sabah for Sabahans slogan movement, which a lot of politicians have sort of taken noted in the previous few weeks. I think Dato' Sri Zahid has said, let's not talk about this because but other parties have said it's a uniting factor. What do you think, Prof?
So Sabah for Sabahans, that thing actually started pre-Malaysia. Even before 1963, there was already sentiments like that. It is a sentiment that cannot be put down, and it is it is something that is very simple to understand, and it is not unique to Sabah because Sarawak also has Sarawak for Sarawakians. Johor also has a very strong state identity. The Kelantanis are famous every time they get together, right? They speak in a dialect. They don't care who else is there. So you cannot say that this thing is unique to Sabah. But in Sabah and Sarawak, the reason why it is sensitive is because the Malay establishment on this side are worried that if this sentiment becomes very strong, that they will lose control over the federal state structure. So that is the reason why. Other than that, I don't think anybody can put it down. It is sort of a natural progression in terms of political development, because it can be found throughout Southeast Asia. Forget about Sabah. You look at the state closest to Sabah, in southern Philippines, right? The Moro identity, Sulu, is also very strong. They also have this thing against Manila as well. So I don't think anything can be done. But this time, I think is very, very specific. This time, the Sabah for Sabahans movement, as far as I can understand, right, is all about making sure that Malayan parties all lose their seat. So if this thing goes through, right, the major beneficiary will of course be GRS, because GRS is almost all Sabah-based party.
Yeah. Now, still sticking on, just going back to MA63 for a bit. Recently, the Sabah Sarawak, I would say the Borneo bloc is looking at the additional 25 parliamentary seats, right, to based on the MA63 rights. Should the Borneo bloc get these seats?
Okay, my position is that the Borneo bloc, or I won't call it the Borneo bloc, Sabah and Sarawak should get the one additional seats. But what people don't understand and got very excited, after these 25 seats came out, is that, this thing will not happen in the next parliament. We will still be voting for 222 in the next parliament. To increase or permanently increase Sabah and Sarawak to 34% of the seats in parliament requires a constitution amendment. That's why I said that you need a 2/3 majority. So everything will be dependent on whether Anwar gets the 2/3 majority next round, or he's willing to amend the constitution in the last 2 years of his term, this term. My understanding is that they're looking at this for the 2 general elections after this. So it will not be adding 25 suddenly to the 222. It's something that will happen in the long term. But the reason I think it's important that I explain myself why I support this. The reason why I support this is because this is part of what we call historical grievances. that Sabah and Sarawak feel that they've been marginalized for the last 60 years. And one of the reasons why they've been marginalized is because they have never been able to carry weight in the Malaysian parliament. At the end of the day, all the political action in Malaysia happens in parliament. And the way the Malaysian parliament works is very strange because it's all based on blocks. So Barisan Nasional in the old days was so strong, they can push down the Sabahans and Sarawakians. Now that they got their own parties, it's much harder to control them. And the other thing that's really, really important is that with historical grievances, if you don't address the historical grievances, the potential negative outcome, you will pay a much, much higher political price. And in some ways, you can make the argument that, it is good for Sabah and Sarawak to get a 1/3. It's because this was the original makeup of what the Federation of Malaysia should be. So if you were to ask me, right, who do you blame for this state of situation? The person I would blame will be the Prime Minister at that time in the 60s. When Singapore left Malaysia in 65, Tunku Abdul Rahman could have easily, this is something very easily, redistributed the 15 seats from Singapore to Sabah and Sarawak, but he didn't do that. I don't know the reason why, and of course it's too late to ask him, but that was not redistributed. And all the problems started from that point onwards. Because after that, right, the whole system collapsed. Because 3 or 4 years after it, you have 69, the racial rights, and in 1971, when they rebuilt the system, right, Sabah and Sarawak became nobodies in the system, right? Because the whole system from 71 onwards was based on this idea of Ketuanan Melayu, Malay dominance. And Razak wanted to create a government of national unity to have a national purpose. That's why 3 years later, he formed a thing called Barisan Nasional. He ditched the Malay Alliance, Barisan Nasional. Barisan Nasional, in fact, invited all the parties, including PAS and DAP, to join, right? It was supposed to be a government national. Yeah. But once Barisan Nasional came on, right, Sabah and Sarawak immediately lost their relevance. Do you remember, right? Barisan Nasional had 14 political parties. So, so you can see, right? And what happened was that in 81, when Mahathir came in, he became a strong man. So Barisan Nasional became not even a real coalition anymore. It was basically UMNO calling the shots. So people keep forgetting, right? One of the reasons why UMNO became so domineering was that in Barisan Nasional, you only had one Malay party. Right? All the other parties, you can have as many Chinese parties as possible, as many Indian parties as possible. You can have as many, Imam party people. They don't care, but they only allow one Malay party, which is UMNO. And you're probably too young, but I lived through a time when in the 1990s, right, when I was interviewing the politicians, right, the standard joke in Kuala Lumpur is that if you want to find out what's going to happen in cabinet, right, go and talk to the people who are part of the UMNO Supreme Council. Because key decisions are made there before they make the cabinet, because the party MT was much more powerful. You see what I mean when I said they dominated the system, the strongman approach.
But if we see now under Anwar, we are seeing that we are more from his side. There's a lot of appeasement of the Sabah and Sarawak, especially Sarawak in this case, right? Especially recently with the Petronas Petros and all this. Now, if the 20% royalties are given to Sarawak, if we give the 25 parliamentary seats, I just want to look ahead. What will this do to the balance of power, and what will this do to Malaya?
Okay. So I need to make a slight correction. It is not Anwar giving concessions to Sarawak, especially on the Petros deal, right? It is seen as a concession by the Malay political establishment, because one of the things about the Malay political establishment in Malaya is that they never forgave Tunku, right? They like the guy, but they never forgave him for allowing Singapore to go. So that's the reason why for the longest time, for the first 40 years after Singapore left Malaysia, the narrative in the political class in Malaysia was that Singapore was kicked out. Okay? That is what you learn in the textbook. But what we know, the reality is that Singapore negotiated. The negotiation took 12 months before Singapore left. You see, a lot of people don't realize it. Yeah. Even a lot of people today think that Singapore was kicked out, suddenly just kicked out. It's not. There was a long negotiation. So the Malay establishment, never forgave Tunku because they are right in the sense that if Tunku has said that you're not allowed to leave the Federation, I can send the troops down at any time and nothing will happen because Singapore doesn't have its own armed forces. They only the police reported to PAP. But in terms of armed forces, they're all Malaysian armed forces. They could have stopped Singapore from leaving anytime. But because, like I said, they negotiated carefully in secret. Only 4 people knew about it. Negotiated over 12 months before they left. So they never forgave Tunku over it. So how is this related to federal-state relationship?
But,
so
sorry,
the
Prof,
thinking is that...
Just one thing. No,
Yeah.
Prof, just one thing. I just want to get more insight on this. You said that the Malay class were not happy that Tunku lost Singapore or that he allowed Singapore. Why were they unhappy?
Yeah, they were unhappy because he could have stopped Singapore from leaving.
But then why would they want Singapore to stay?
No, because the reason why they wanted Singapore to stay was because they understood that Singapore was supposed to be the economic powerhouse.
I see. Okay.
Singapore for the longest time has always been an entrepot. Everybody knows that. Because
even from back then.
Even from back then. So you have to understand, right? At that time, right, Malaysia holds all the card. Because all their food, all the water, everything came from Malaya. The armed forces security was also from Malaya.
I see.
Tunku could have stopped Singapore from leaving at any time.
Oh, this I did not know. Okay. Please go on.
Right?
Sorry, bro.
You think about it in the 60s, right? What did Singapore have? Nothing, not much. All the food was imported from Malaya. And today, even now, right, significant portion of Singapore food is still, people joke about all the high-end fruits that you buy from Singapore. They're all from Cameron Highlands, ma. The water Singapore was forced to build. People don't understand the water that Singapore buy, the what do you call it? The dam and the water purification plant in Johor, right? That was built with Singapore money. Yes, you can go and look it up. All this was built by Singapore.
Okay.
They need Malaya more than they really had no choice. Okay, so anyway, I want to link this back to my argument.
Go on. Yeah.
So they are very worried that if you give concession to Sabah and Sarawak, and then the federal government loses control over Sabah and Sarawak, right? Then the succession thing is on their mind. That is what they're really afraid of. That Sabah and Sarawak will break away. So you can see, right, in the case of Sabah, right, I can prove it easily that this is what they're thinking about. That is the reason why when Mustafa Harun tried to take Sabah out of Malaysia, right? The federal government, the first thing they did was to sponsor a local party called Berjaya to beat Mustafa Harun. Right? Berjaya was actually sponsored. One of the key leaders of Berjaya is, of course, the former Chief Minister Haris Saleh. He gave an interview, I think in the last 2 or 3 years. He said it openly, before Berjaya was formed, right? I was asked to fly to Kuala Lumpur, where I was told to help the first Hugan Sao to set up the political party in order to bring Mustafa Harun down. I mean, this is the real history, not the stuff you read in the textbook.
Exactly. I never knew this.
So you see, right? So the federal control has always been to stop Sabah and Sarawak from pulling out. So you can see, right, after they were not successful in Sabah, they decided to make Sabah Muslim majority. If it's Muslim majority, much harder for you to pull away from the federation. So one of the reasons why Project M or Project IC happened in Sabah is to make Sabah a Muslim majority country, to make sure that the Kadazan Dusun or the non-Muslim Bumutra can never be a threat. Because if you look at the electoral system up to the early 70s, right, the Kadazan Dusun or the non-Muslim majority, right, they were the majority in the state assembly. And then when we became, now, right, even if all the non-Muslim Bumutra, right, voted against the government or voted for a party, right, they wouldn't have enough seats. So Sabah is a Muslim majority state now. Unless the Muslims in Sabah don't want to have anything to do with the Muslims in Malaya, right, it will, be part of the federation. Okay. So that's how they control it.
But recently as well, there was a PKR delegate, I think from Sarawak, who proposed a special parliamentary committee to ensure the implementation of the MA63. Now, from donkey years ago, I've been hearing this, back and forth, special committee, MA63 rights and all that. Do you see a time when MA63 will be fully adhered to?
Okay. it depends on what MA63 you're talking about. If you're just talking about things like political autonomy, the answer is that Sabah and Sarawak will get about 70 to 80% of what they ask for in terms of political autonomy. Sarawak will get a lot more. Sarawak will probably get to 80 to 90%, but it will never be 100%. When you talk about economic autonomy, that will probably never happen for Sabah and Sarawak. It will be under 50%. When you talk about things like federal-state relationship, I think Sarawak will end up with being the most autonomous state. But Sabah, as long as the Malayan parties are around, that will not happen as well. So it depends on what sort of autonomy you're talking about. I think the best way of understanding federal-state relationship in terms of MA63 is to say that, at the end of the day, the key decisions about the daily lives of Sabahans will be decided in Kota Kinabalu rather than Putrajaya, and the key decisions regarding the daily lives of Sarawakians will be decided in Kuching rather than Putrajaya. That is the easiest way of understanding autonomy, because when you talk to autonomy, the ways normal Sabahans and Sarawakians understand autonomy is very different from the way the bureaucrats understand. So, for example, you talk about the confusion over the MA committee formed by the federal government. There's been 4 so far, right? Most of them has been dealing with administrative matters like decentralization of powers and all that sort of thing. So, when you talk about MA63, the bottom line is that day-to-day living, who decides, what you do in your life. Is it decided by Putrajaya or is it decided by Kota Kinabalu or Kuching? So that is how I see autonomy for Sabah and Sarawak. And as long as the majority of Sabahans and Sarawakians think that the decision about how they lead their lives are decided in Kuching and KK, I think people will be quite happy. They will be very unhappy if they feel that Putrajaya is trying to control their lives through their proxies or direct intervention in Sabah and Sarawak. And that is the reason why, until today, right, Sarawakians are very angry with the federal government for overthrowing Kalau Ningkang, the chief minister, right? That's a direct intervention. Just as in Sabah, they're very angry that, their chief minister, Pairing, was overthrown by Kuala Lumpur directly. Mustafa Harun was overthrown by Kuala Lumpur directly. So that is what people don't want. So that is an example of 2 extremes, right? Where federal intervention decides everything that you do, plus the one that I said, maximum autonomy, which is that your life is dependent on decisions taken in Kuching and Kota Kinabalu.
Thank you so much, Prof, for coming on the podcast. I really enjoyed talking to you. I hope you had fun having this discussion. I hope to have you on again. Please, whenever you're free, let me know. We can always talk about current political issues and all that. Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you for coming. So, guys, that's all we have today with the amazing Professor James Chin. It's been really amazing talking to him. I truly love some of the things that he said, and I hope he comes on. If you guys want him to come on, please share your likes, share your comments, and share your thoughts on what he has said. We'll see you all soon next time, guys. Take care. Bye.